Test.
Hello, is that better? Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'll start again. So we're going to challenge you a little bit to think about some of the things you're probably already familiar with, but think about how they're applied in the real world when you're thinking about this idea of integrated urban sustainability. So we've probably all seen the versions of this diagram before and the kind of the three pillars of sustainability, the triple bottom line, people, planet, profit, all those different aspects. But the challenging part when you actually try to implement it in a city context is those things have to stay in balance. There's a lot of examples where one of those things is the focus of a city and it throws the other two out of balance. So if there's too much focus on economic growth, then that might have a negative impact on social issues or might have a negative impact on environmental issues. On the flip side, if there's too much focus on social issues, then that might have a negative economic impact. So you kind of have to keep all of these things in balance. So as we go through the workshop, that's one thing I want you to think about is how do you balance the different aspects and different kind of strategies that might go together to work on something that actually produces the results you're looking for. Another thing to think about is there's many big challenges out there in the world. So there's a lot of parts of the world that are water stressed, and that's obviously a challenge. But at the same time, there's also parts of the world that are dealing with too much water and natural disaster. And kind of in the context of climate change, and in the context of this event, which is an investment kind of focused event, what kind of impacts do investments have, or could they have, on solving these challenges, and what kind of impact would these kind of issues have on investment? So if anybody's coming from an investment background, you're probably thinking about the risks that are associated with the things that you invest in. Obviously, if you're investing in, physical assets that are at risk of climate change, then that's obviously something you need to consider. And it's also an opportunity to invest in things that are helping to solve the problem and things that are generating positive outcomes rather than just looking at the financial income or financial impacts as the only criteria. Air quality index is another big topic. Obviously, if there's health impacts, then productivity goes down. Again, if you're an investor, you want to be thinking about, what is the quality of the life of your workforce, because that's going to have an impact on how productive your teams are, how productive the city is, and how you keep things moving from an economic perspective. But again, that has a big impact on the actual social value and human beings that are living in that particular city. So there's big challenges across the board. There's already a lot of systems you might be familiar with on how to make the built environment more sustainable, and you might be familiar with some of those. And they've evolved over time. In the early days, when like LEED, for example, when it first started, it was purely focused on environmental impacts. They started to add in more. Other systems are developed, and other things have come along, like the well rating system that look at the social impacts as well, or the health and wellness of the people in the environment. But they're still were focused mostly on the building level. More recently, there have been more precinct level rating systems that kind of come at it from a different perspective, a different scale, and start to look at this integrated approach across an urban environment, a city, a neighborhood, a district. And a lot of these things are very important starting points, but they're not the whole story. So the way we've used these systems at EXPO, and we'll talk a little bit about that as an example in a little while, but they're a good starting point, but they don't solve all the problems, and they're not always localized enough. So you need to always also challenge the systems. You might have a really good starting point with a rating system, but then you need to think about what else can you do to keep it in balance with the other two objectives, or what can you do to supplement the system to go beyond what the rating system calls for. Like, for example, water scarcity is a big issue in the Middle East, obviously. So some of the systems are great, but they don't focus on water enough. So do you need to add some additional thought and additional requirements around water, or thinking about how water can be managed? The other thing that we want to challenge you to think about is going beyond the idea of sustainability. And hopefully some of you have seen this graph before, but the UN Sustainable Development Goals is a really good framework to look at the global issues around sustainability on social, economic, and environmental topics. But that gets us to a point where we're not doing as much harm. It's, sustainability in the early days was really about trying to correct some of the bad practices we had as a society, economic, construction, the way we move people and goods around the cities, things like that. And it was all about doing less bad to get to a point where things are sustainable, which they can continue on without doing too much damage. We're now moving towards a more positive approach where instead of just trying to do less bad, we're really trying to do more good. And that's what the right-hand side of this graph is really looking at. Go beyond just pure sustainability and go to a restorative kind of approach to make a positive impact and leave things better than what you found it. And that's a really big challenge in a city, but there is a lot of opportunities there when you're looking at it from an integrated fashion. Monty mentioned this interdependent kind of approach before, and I'll focus a little bit on this example. Like, nature knows how to clean water. It does it. It's been doing it since the start of time. So why can't we learn from that and use natural processes to kind of deal with some of the infrastructure challenges we have in a city? And that seems obvious, but that's not how cities are built normally. They're usually default to the technical solution rather than the natural solution. So there's a big push to do things like that. So that's the other thing to kind of think about along the way. And then finally, I'll stop here on this slide for just a few seconds to talk about how we apply these concepts to Expo City in developing an urban district that is trying to implement this integrated approach using the layers that Nadia talked about before and really looking at each of the layers. Our current work is basically looking at transitioning the site from what was the Expo event location to Expo City Dubai. And it was always designed as a future city, but now we're going through the process of actually implementing that. And kind of very similar to the layered approach that we talked about earlier, our objectives for the city going forward are a sustainable built environment, which is the first layer, a sustainable operating environment, which is the second layer here, and then the engaged community is really about the experiential and the programmed environment, and then the virtual environment actually feeds all three. So we're really looking at all 5 of those layers that we talked about earlier to achieve these 3 kind of main objectives for the city. But just using this picture as an example, this is an urban site, but we obviously integrated nature into the site very intentionally to try to make the place as integrated as possible, using nature to kind of address some of the main issues. It's a walkable site, so we had to think about things like heat island effect. Is it possible to walk around the site or move around the site in the middle of summer? Part of that solution is reducing heat island effect by having nature as part of the solution. There's also a lot of shade structures. If you haven't been there before, you would have seen them, but there's pictures that show that later. So there's all these different things that we looked at from an integrated approach that actually comes back to this idea of looking at it as a system of systems. One thing doesn't exist by itself. It actually feeds into all the different aspects of every other parts of the city. So going into what we want you to do over the next 40 minutes, there's 3 questions we want you to ask and ask yourself and answer, and we'll break up into small groups. The 3 questions are looking at this list on the side of potential topics, and if you don't see a topic you like, you can kind of create your own. But the first question is identifying challenges that relate to that topic. It could be for your city, your specific city, or it could be a topic in general, like what kind of issues are affecting cities or challenges are affecting cities. The second question is to develop some solutions to those challenges. And then the third question is, what are the opportunities for integration and collaboration and investment and other things to kind of bring those solutions to life? We'll give about 5, individually take about 5 minutes for each question. And then at the end, we'll come together and ask everybody to kind of, somebody from the table will report what's the one big idea you came up with for your topic. So is that clear so far? Okay. So what we'll do is we'll start now with, and how we're going to break up the tables. We were going to do groups, so probably the 2 tables here will kind of turn and face each other, and this table turn and face each other, and maybe you in the back, maybe you can join one of the 2 groups here. And then just work together for the next 15 minutes to go through the questions, and then we'll do a little bit of a reporting at the end, and then we'll move on to the next section.
Okay. I'm going to break us up here. It's always a tough job to have to, what it looks like good conversations taking place. But I want to make sure we have an opportunity to hear from you and then also to continue the discussion. So, table A and B, or however we want to say it, group. It's better, multiple tables, we'll say groups. You all had a good discussion here. I'm kind of pointing at the 6 of you that are here in front of me. Started. It's only, I'm not expecting any solutions necessarily other than Yeah, you want to share that mic with them? Anyone want to just report out on topics that you discussed? Any big ideas? Anyone want to share?
Hi, my name is Varun. I think it's not loud.
Yep, it's there. Just put it close.
So the main focus is the transportation.
Transportation.
Yeah. So from my journey, where all I've gone, especially in Dubai, there are places there's no transportation covered. Whereas there's already development on the real estate places, but there's still no focus on transportation. I think from my understanding is because probably they think we don't need transportation, but people do need transportation because Dubai overall think that everyone has got a car, but not everyone's got a car, so they need to focus on that as well. And for transportation-wise, I would say Ajman and Sharjah, because they're still like building up slowly, but it's still not easily accessible for the buses, because there are places so remotely area and it's crowded, but there's no buses over there, and there's no access for like cabs or anything as such. So it's difficult for people to like commute to work and just to get buses. And there's no. I feel personally there should be metro access to all the Emirates, even though we have the Etihad rail coming up, but that's going to be like the main outskirts for the main states. But I think there should be a train for like covering the insides of the cities, especially in Sharjah, Ajman, and Dubai overall. For people commuting from Dubai, I say, because Abu Dhabi is still under development, but people working from Dubai, there are a lot of people come from Ajman to Ras Al Khaimah, Sharjah, so it'll be easier for them to like take a direct metro or bus as well.
Yeah. I mean, you're bringing up a couple of really good points in that the transportation solution, we use the word mobility a lot. So it's not just about any one, kind of back to this systems idea, it's not about any one type of transportation. You need multiple options. And it's rideshare and taxi and it's bus and maybe it's last mile scooters and shared bikes and then it's metro or transit. But the other point that you're making is around scale. It's not just transit access in the city, but how do you think about regional transit? You know, in many cities, it's sort of there's a commuter population, and then there's the inner city metro. So you're bringing up some really good challenges around choice and scale.
And also another thing I want to add is, whereas for everyone who uses Google Maps over here,
Google Maps?
Yeah, so that can be easier way for people, for example, RTA people. For RTA, like for example, like we have to commute somewhere. So normally when we go to a certain destination, we'll see reviews of people who have been to that location. So you'll know it's a trustworthy person who's traveled over there as well. So it will be easier for them. If I want to go there to that place, at least I know there's a nearby bus stop over there. There's a taxi stand over there. At least I can rely on the map. At least I can rely on people. I can go there. Because normally for me, when I go there, I see the map. I see there's people there. I trust their source. I go over there. So I don't need to take my car. I can take a direct train or bus over there. So I feel like the transport company should rely on the maps and see reviews. In that way, they can also build transportation places. Plus, I feel they should rely on maps in case, for example, if I go to a place and I be like there is no metro access or bus stop access, I can put on Google reviews or maps. In that way, it can be a reach out for the whole community. It'll be a more safer option.
Well, you know, Nadia talked about the layered city, right? And you're bringing up the important role that digital plays in all of this, because you just use the word safety, I believe, as well, right? So it's information, but it's allowing you to make smarter decisions that make your daily existence more efficient, but also safer. Really good points. Anything else from this team? Anyone else want to take the mic?
Just one more point.
Okay.
I feel like every transportation company should think of, like as a common man, like how we would like go and how we would reach that place. It should be like a same common relatable point, even though it's a bigger head, manage your transport. Just think of it as a common person, like how they can go to that place and commute. And also to reduce the traffic lanes as well and to reduce more accidents as well. To be safer for everyone to reach home to their families as well.
Yeah, I mean, back to social value and being able to think about this from a holistic point of view. We do a lot of work around personas. You know, who are the people that are engaging with a place, and what is a typical day in the life of these different actors, if you will, in a city, and we have to be thinking about all of that. Great points, and I appreciate you being willing to share. Anyone else?
So So my name is Sana Sabit. So to add on his point, like the thing is, UAE has 7 emirates. So each emirate has each transport system. So like it's RTA for Dubai, STA. So it would be easier if there's like a collaborated transport system, so that they will be connected with intercities. Like as he said, like Dubai is not much. It is comparatively connected than the other cities, the other emirates. But if you go to maybe like Ajman or Sharjah, it's not that connected. So it's like even traffic increasing is mostly because of that. Like if you're stuck in the Sharjah Dubai traffic, no way you're going to reach home within like 1 or 2 hours. It's going to be like really difficult. So that's one of the other issues which is there. And I'm someone who usually uses public transport because I don't have a car. So when I used to go to my university, it's in academic city where basically it's like a university hub, and there's no metro there. And it's super difficult because buses never reach on time because as usual it's traffic. So it would be nice if places like this, like academic city, Dubai Internet City, where there are universities, a university hub, it's a school hub, if there is metro access, it would be much easier. But the other good thing of Dubai is like there are many initiatives that they're going through, like sustainability, like they're bringing like electric taxis. But that shift is a gradual process because not everyone is able to go with an electric car because it's not like a normal car. The feel is so different. Mm-hmm. Like you can race in the other car, but not in an electric car. Like you don't get the sound. It's different. And also electric car is pretty expensive. So that's another issue. So hopefully we might reach there and there are better alternatives other than Tesla coming forward. So yeah.
No, more good comments. I mean, regional cooperation is one of the things that you talked about, and the need to connect all of these nodes of activity. And I know in the 2040 plan in Dubai, there's a big focus on connecting these centers of activity. And then in Abu Dhabi, they're about to undertake a new 2040 plan as well. So you're bringing up a lot of really important issues. So you wanted to know, Daniel.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to both of your comments. Monty mentioned the word mobility that we talk about a lot, but you also mentioned access, which is another topic. They're related, but they're not the same. So really, why do you need mobility? It's so you can access whatever you're trying to get to, your job, your school. And like going back to the EXPO City Dubai example, have you heard of the concept of 15-minute city? So the whole idea of the 15-minute city is your access is immediately in your surroundings. Like 90% of what you need in your daily life is within that neighborhood or that district. And the only reason you get in traffic is if you need to go somewhere further occasionally, not every day. So the whole idea of needing inter emirate transport, that still needs to be there. But really the big solution is to rethink the way we think about what do we do in our daily lives. We should be thinking about neighborhoods and districts as most of our activities are there providing the access we need, which makes the mobility solutions a lot easier. And then you only need the connections when you need to occasionally go somewhere else. So that's just one big point, I think.
Yeah, it's complex. All right, the other table here, still good conversations going on. Anyone want to take the mic and share some things?
In our case, we're very fortunate that the members of our group, we do have, we're from the Philippines, from Asia. One of our colleagues is from Africa, and then from Hungary. So we were able to really have an exchange of the experience that we have in our respective countries. And one of the major topics that we had was that despite the modern technology that one would expect in our countries, power and water facilities is still not that established, or majority of our communities really do not have that access for the power and water. So that was one of the main challenges that we discussed in our group. And when we discussed the solutions that we can have for that, it really starts with urban planning, the right planning when it comes to your city. It's just to make sure that you don't just build the facilities, but it's developing your city in a sustainable manner. It's coming up with ways to use your resources in a renewable manner, such that you are not only utilizing the resources, but you're making sure that the needs of the community are being met in a long-term manner. And in terms of investments, we were just talking about it that once we have some of our areas master planned, we engage the help of the government, but as well as the private sector. in having public-private partnerships in establishing water or power facilities. It's one would think that in this day and age, people would have that access, but to power and water. But still, in our case, we were just talking about it that in her community they could go with 5 days without water, and even with us in our well, personally, I live in a city in the Philippines, but currently because of El Nino and global warming, the water supply is still not that consistent. So there really is a need not just to develop the right infrastructure, but to plan it just to you are addressing the carrying capacity of your cities. So that's, for us, that's one of the challenges and the solutions that we identified in our discussion.
I want to add, we also we face this challenge in our communities is sometimes you can go without the power for even days. So for the solution, maybe a proposal, the renewable energy companies could get more involved into this, because we see some coming, but it's not really that effective to enlighten the indigenous about how they can actually use the solar energy. Yes, because it's really going that bad daily. Instead of improving power and water supply, it's a big problem. Those that cannot afford the challenges they are facing is health-wise, especially those in the less communities. They now some go to the rivers to get water to drink, because not everybody can afford the mineral. Yes. So.
Now, one of the slides talked about the notion that we need local solutions, right? So you're bringing up these points at a really important level, that the challenges that are faced in some parts of the world or in some cities are going to be quite different. And so how do we think about basic infrastructure needs in certain places? And then the point that you're making, I think, is in some ways similar to the idea of transportation. It can't be just one solution to solve the access to power. How do we think, as you're saying, around alternative energy opportunities? And so there's multiple ways of providing a more stable power grid for those citizens, and then connecting to the public-private partnership idea. Again, it takes a broad range of stakeholders to make good on this opportunity to create more integrated and sustainable cities. So those are some really good. I could tell you were having a good conversation, and it was obvious that you really were. Those are some really good comments, and I appreciate. You have something you want to add to?
For the first bullet, sir, I think although it's not really that alarming, it's really a challenge when we talk about migration, because a lot of people, when they seek for opportunity from rural areas, outside the metropolitan cities, they migrate because they know there's a lot of opportunity. Yes. Especially in the Philippines, in the National Capital Region. A basic example is like in the Manila. By day, it's really 11 to 12 million, but by night, it's around 8 to 9 million because it's really, most of these people, if not the working sector, do not really reside within the city. So that's really a big challenge because of for example, the space that they really need to occupy. It has to be comfortable, right, sir? It really has to be a decent place somehow. And a lot of residence owners are taking advantage of that. Of course, they even, no matter how small, like the size of condos, typical size, you really have to grab the opportunity just for you to have a daily home to sleep, reside. So I think, sir, the potential solution is it's somehow happening, like businessmen invest in outside metropolitan cities. So in order for these job seekers to just apply there, and of course start their career and have more decent life. And of course, it's also an opportunity for the local government unit because their respective taxes, income, and economic development will eventually soar up high, and that will bring more social and economic development, and of course peace and order as well, because stability is really increasing.
Yeah, more great points. I mean, you talk about the need for regional cooperation, and to look at these challenges from that broader perspective. It's not just the city center, but it's the metro area, and you're talking about 3 million plus or minus commuting in and out each day. That presents a whole different set of challenges. And then you almost ended on the perfect segue, because you talked about the social and economic piece. So what we want to do now is transition into a conversation around how we measure and how do we think about creating social value. So my colleague Laura is going to lead us through that conversation, and then you'll have a chance to dive into that amongst yourselves in a minute as well.
Where's the clicker? Great. All right. So when we're looking at projects, or we're considering projects, the first thing that typically comes to mind is how much money are we going to make out of this project? But based on the conversations that we've had just now, we can also recognize that it's not just the economic value. There are multiple factors that are involved, and namely the community being engaged, making sure that whatever is being provided is actually the want and the ask from the people that are going to be utilizing, these services. So the return on investment, when we're looking at return on investment, we have to make sure that what is being provided is actually what is needed. And, this is a wonderful quote by Robert Kennedy, which is that, GDP doesn't allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, the joy of their play. It doesn't measure our wit, our courage, our wisdom, our learning, everything in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And, I know you're from the healthcare technology. You guys are, I think, the Filipino delegation. You're from the tourism, right? So you want to think from the context of, we're not just putting things out there, but what value is this giving to the people that are going to be using it, to the community, to the country? So we have to think kind of wider scale. And if we tie that back into what Monty mentioned about the triple bottom line, which is not just looking about, we talk about the bottom line, which is how much money are we making? But no, the triple bottom line is, what is it making economically? Yes, but what is it giving? What is it giving back to the people? What is it giving back to the planet? So the measure of success has to be looked at very differently. So when we're thinking of creating social value, we have to consider it from an inclusive growth perspective. And when we think of inclusive growth, we also have to think of what is the final outcome of inclusive growth, which is actually a thriving society, something that's longer lasting, because growth isn't always an indicator of success. Right? A growing city, a growing country, a growing GDP is not an indicator of the actual overall health of a city or of a community. So economic prosperity is one angle, but then well-being and quality of life is another angle. And then equity and distribution is another angle. So, there was talk about electricity not being available or clean water not being available. What's the use if we have, a power plant that only services those that can afford it? Or it only services those that can be, that are in the city that can be linked up to the grid, but it's not extending out to the rural areas. So we really need to think of it from the three factors. So this is this is an index looking at social cohesion. It was done between a university in Australia and a research institution that looked at measuring the different indices in 18 different cities around Australia. And they looked at belonging, so how much is there a shared value and identification with Australia, and trust in the government, in the country, in the mayors, in the city stakeholders. The social justice and equity, so looking at their national policies, does this actually offer equality to everyone? Do these policies apply to everyone? Participation. Is there voluntary work, political and cooperative involvement? Is everyone on the ground engaged? Are we getting everyone's voice? Acceptance and rejection, legitimacy. So how many people are experiencing discrimination, or do we have the same attitude towards minority and newcomers? Is everyone being treated the same? Is everyone having the same experience? If not, then why? And then worth, so which is life satisfaction and happiness and future expectations. So, in a nutshell, we need to think from the perspective that if something is going to be successful, everybody needs to be on the same page. We can't leave anyone behind because that's just going to be a pain point later on. So this is an example of, we were talking about equity and advantage or inclusiveness. So here if we look at Melbourne, which is the main city in Australia, we can see that there are 11 jobs per 10 residents, which means there's, more than enough jobs. But if we step out by, say, 30 kilometers outside of Melbourne, it significantly drops to 4 jobs per 10 residents. And the average wage is 21% less than the inner suburbs. So this is an indication of inequality. And this is what actually, there was a talk about driving, about urban growth. Everyone wants to move into the city because there's just more jobs, there's more connectivity, there's more everything in a city. So when we want to talk about growth, we also have to consider we can still grow and we can still thrive by making things accessible to everyone existing out and around beyond the city itself, which will also add to the overall country's growth and success. If we continue on the topic of inclusiveness, I'll just move over here. We've just picked on the topic of gender inclusiveness because sometimes we don't consider all members of society. This is just an example of, one of the minority groups. It could be people of determination. It could be senior people or the elderly. If we focus here and we look through the lens of a particular group of people, we recognize that their experience within a city, from accessibility to jobs to transportation, is very different. And it allows us to recognize where we also need to be considering adding value in our city, in our community. So in this case, if we look through the lens of, say, an elderly person or a mother that is pushing her child, how easy is it for her to be getting from point A to point B? Does she have to drive? Is it easy for her to get to public transport? No, it's not. But then if we look at one minority group, it's also, and in this case we're looking at women, it's actually relevant to all other groups of people. So this just, from a city perspective, makes you think that, or from even an investor perspective, how do we make life easier for people? How do we make people want to come and live here? How do we create more jobs? How are we targeting or really looking at the pain points and putting our money where it's going to make a difference and, in turn, give us the right return? So when we consider that, our government, our politicians, our investors are asking the community, what is it that you want? And they're thinking from the perspective of value creation for all. What it does is it increases the trust, first of all, that we trust what's being done by the private sector, by the public sector. At the moment, you can see that these numbers are, not very high. So basically, the feedback is, I'm not sure what is true and what is not. And I think this is a lot of feelings when we read in the newspapers about new developments that are coming up. Is this really talking about what it's going to give back, or is this just a big headline announcement? I do not know which politicians to trust. I'm voting for this politician. Am I really going to see what they're talking about? I do not know which companies and brands to trust, because from what I've seen, everyone's just thinking about their pockets. And this is where the change comes when, whether we're looking at private sector or public sector, when there is the bottom-up approach, listening to what's needed on the ground and taking it from there and really working to identify where the value is needed, that's where we see the effective change. So this is, I'm just going to share some examples of cities that have done that, where they've worked with their communities to identify what the key pain points are and then implemented the asks. So in the case of the Edinburgh City Centre, they recognized through public engagement that they had to prioritize transport. So facilitating movement on foot, by bike, or by public transport. You know, there was a mention here of the cities in the UAE, which it's not, you know, you need a car to get around. Transport is not easy. They also looked at the need for changes in their urban infrastructure, the public transport, public spaces, and this was not just opinion. They gathered the data, they gathered the facts, and they presented it. So they had a detailed business case, which also considered the return on investment. What are we going to get out of this? We're not just doing it because it's an ask, but because it makes sense. So their strategy on improving the quality of life in the city was estimated to generate 420 million pounds of benefits to the city, because who doesn't want to live in an inclusive city that facilitates life for not just the people living there, but for people that are even visiting? Comprising 110 million pounds of economic benefit and 310 million pounds of well-being benefit. And this actually led them to win an award. So from a tourism perspective, you know, I want to go to Edinburgh now. I want to see what this is about. From an investor perspective as well, it's like, well, let's go learn and see what worked, what didn't work. Another example is in Birmingham. So it's called the Snow Hill redevelopment in Birmingham City. Very similar, where they also worked with the community to understand the needs. They gave them different options to see what their different wants were, and then based on that, they went ahead with the redevelopment of the city, and they improved access to green space, community cohesion. Community cohesion is very important because this can make or break a city, a community, and it's not just about growth; it's about thriving. So communities thrive together. So in their case, even traffic noise reduction was something that they wanted to work on. So you can read more about them online. All right. So if we started on the international level. If we drill down to the UAE and Dubai in particular, and what they're doing in their 20-year roadmap, they're looking at all of these things. How can we prepare ourselves for the future growth, to be an inclusive city, not just from a people perspective, which I think they've done a great job in, but even from making the city more accessible, for making it more accessible for residents to move around. The 15-minute city concept, which will support mobility, connection to transit. It'll take you less time to get to work. Maybe if you're living in Sharjah and you're living in Dubai, maybe you don't even need to leave where you're working actually at the end of the day, because you're 15 minutes and it's super easy to get around. And then the policy for affordable housing, so making housing more affordable. But then here's an example of an announcement of, okay, affordable housing, everyone gets excited. But we need to think further than that. What's around this affordable housing? Is it affordable housing within 15 minutes of my workspace? Is it 15 minutes from a hospital, a school? So it can be affordable, but if the surrounding area isn't facilitating my quality of life and supporting my life, then what's the point of affordable housing if I'm out in, the middle of nowhere? So I'll pass on to Misha now, who will link us back to EXPO City.
Thank you, Lara. Thank you for sharing all the benefits that we can have in a city. And also now looking at zooming from the global perspective of how cities have adopted the social value in their cities and how Dubai is doing it. I would just want to take you through the framework that we have adopted as EXPO City throughout the different stages of construction process, through strategy and planning, through the feasibility process, and while we were constructing the city, and in the operations. So during the whole project life cycle, we looked at understanding the different levels and drivers of growth, really involving and integrating each and every stakeholder in the process, and identifying the priorities of different stakeholders, ensuring, as Lara mentioned, it's important to understand what are the priorities of different stakeholders, what are different values they have that can add value to the city. And as Nadia mentioned in the very beginning, that the city is built by the people. So really ensuring that all voices are accounted for during the strategy, while the strategy is being built. And ensuring that the concept of inclusive growth is embedded into the decision-making process. Moving on to the feasibility and design, we looked at the project management and the design process, ensuring that the social value is leveraged throughout the project life cycle, designing each and every part, each and every component of the project to ensure that during the construction and operation phase, we are maximizing the social value of the project. And in the construction stage, wherever there was a need for employment, for training, it was embedded for different groups. This is just an example of what goes into a generic framework, but also how it's important to understand that how all those values which were shared by Lara have been integrated through each and every process of the project. So employment, training, ensuring that during the supply chain, in the supply chain process, all these values are embedded through the policies, through the frameworks, and they are carried forward during the operations phase, making sure that all the SMEs are accounted for, because the city is not only built by the government, not only built by the developers, but there are so many different components, so many different actors who are running the cities. So really ensuring that the social enterprises are embedded into the whole framework of the planning and design and the operation. And also ensuring that there is a diverse workforce throughout the process, and also when we are running the city operations. And really ensuring that the city, the infrastructure, and the supporting frameworks, which is like transport, is really helping the city to run efficiently in an integrated, sustainable manner. And all these values, the values that have driven this whole process, has been embedded into our layers, which you have seen initially, which was the physical layer that is the built environment, the operations layer of how we are really running the city, what are the day-to-day functions which are adding value to the users, to the residents, to the staff, and also ensuring that they feel connected to everything around them. They feel connected, they are a part of the process, they are informed, and they are really working together. All of us are working together to really add value to the efficient running of the city in an integrated, sustainable manner. So with this, I would like you to all now break out again to address these questions in the next 20 minutes. There are some sample discussion topics that you can pick from, or feel free to add to use any other topic that is you think is of value in context of your city or hometown. And yeah, then we will get together again after 20 minutes? Oh, 10 minutes. Okay. 10 minutes.
And then we're already close to the top.
Yeah. So, yeah, if we can make two groups again, I think. Yeah. Okay. So maybe 4 here and 4 there.
Okay. That was good? Yeah, of course. I mean, that's the challenge of this, right? You get things started, and then you got to find a way to unwind it a little bit. Do we want to start with group 2 this time, or do you all want to? Ladies, would you like to share some of your conversations?
It's about to share very genius, excellent.
Awesome. No pressure.
We
Genius.
Started, no pressure of genius. Where is that one? Can you hear me? Oh.
We can.
So we started by the discussion of like gender equality, like listing those topics and where it can take us if we build on it. And then we started discussion about the human resource which exists in the Philippines as a potential, a huge human resource, and what can we do with it. And then, I started talking to them about hemp and how we started recently a project in Zimbabwe where we are connecting education, connecting sustainability, educating the young generation, giving them hands-on tools, resources, and a skill set that they can later on use to either establish their business or use it as a hands-on experience for their future studies. So I was sharing this, and then we got very much carried away with imagining and seeing how it can happen in the Philippines.
Education, empowerment of the youth, important topics, and it becomes very local, but that's a common problem, I think, and a common opportunity in many parts of the world. So we'd love to explore how do we take that seed of an idea and build on it. Great points.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything from the team here? Maybe we can pass. Maybe I can knock the table over.
Yeah, thank you for this very interesting talk and topic. I think social impact we could go on for, and social values we can go on for a whole day. So trying to break it down into a few minutes is a little tricky. One of the things I want to say before we get into what we spoke about was I feel like everything that you have there is actually embodied in point number 5, which is quality of life. And I think between 4 and 5, if you have that, you can the rest of it kind of falls into place. With a group of 4 interns here, we talked about youth engagement being the key topic. And the concerns were lack of jobs, being in a very expensive city to live, access to paid opportunities that pay fairly, and things that we came across as solutions were things like having a basic minimum wage for the region where whether they are qualified, not qualified, have some experience or not, they can at least get a basic minimum wage that will enable them to fend for themselves, to get started in life, and then build up that experience. Looking at things like having trial periods for jobs so that the employer can feel like they're able to feel the candidate before they actually commit to them. Having government support and opportunities within government, I think we thought was very important, because the fact is these 4 ladies here have almost no opportunities right now. They apply to, I'm speaking for you, but they apply to hundreds of jobs and very rarely get a response. So how do we fix that problem is what we talked about. We looked at collaboration between other countries. How do we fill gaps that other countries have in job needs, that we can share resources? And from a solution perspective as well, how do we fix it through upskilling, events, workshops, and government collaborations that can enable them to get the skills that they need earlier on. Obviously, education is getting more and more obsolete when you contrast it to the real world and what's needed today with all the technology and developments out there. So how do we fix that problem for these young ladies here?
Wow. You're right. This could be its own topic for the day. And then also back to some of what we discussed earlier, the local nature of these, not only the challenges, but the local nature of the solutions that we find. And it's interesting. We've had this conversation earlier in the week with a smaller, different group, And it was interesting to hear some of the things that came up even in your brief discussions, the consistency in a way of ideas and how some of these challenges are being thought of globally. Social value, you sort of read your way down here. New ways of defining and communicating value, human-centric solutions, mental health, personalize these outcomes, scale matters. You're going to see youth engagement, mentorship, leadership, reinforcing and encouraging gathering beyond just a commercial outcome. If it's all commercial driven, that changes why a community may be coming together. You mentioned quality of life as a key driver here. So really interesting to hear, even in our short breakouts, just some of the common themes on how others are looking at these challenges. And you're bringing up the layered nature of this and why integration is so important and why we have to look at it holistically. So we appreciate your willingness to spend some time with us today. I think we've had a really good discussion. We've certainly learned some things from the feedback, and wish you well for the rest of your conference, and are glad that you chose to spend some of your Sunday morning talking about these important topics. So thank you very much.